Well, welcome back, everyone. I'm Sonia Fournier. I'm a consultant here at PM Square, and I also run our training practice. Um, I hope you had a good mini break. If you're coming from another presentation, we're going to give people a few minutes to kind of move over here. But we're very happy you can join us today here on one of our Incorta presentations. So we're going to be covering from raw data to analytics in 1 hour with Incorta. Let me see if my slide won't move. So while we're waiting for people to shuffle in from the other sessions, I thought I would go over some of the different bacon giveaways that we have for available for all of our participants. So there's a whole list of all this stuff on the app. You can jump in and take a look and see kind of how you would win different ways. But there are 17 different ways to win, and you can see all the different exciting products that you will have here. There's an IBM grand prize of 14 pieces of luggage, now that hopefully we'll get to travel again soon. And then there is a bacon grand prize. So you can see some of the different prizes up on the app. And the bacon grand prize from PM Square is an indoor-outdoor theater kit. So there's lots of details on how you can be entered to win. And then this prize will be announced in a post-event email. So very exciting different options that you'd have here. The best way to increase your chances of winning is to make sure your way onto the leaderboard. So you can do that by being as engaged as possible with the Bacon 2021. So if you provide session feedback, if you interact with other participants, and there's lots of different ways to kind of improve your odds of winning. So do take a look at that. And then also one of the there's a session giveaway as well for this one, and one attendee in this session will be randomly selected to receive a $500 Amazon gift card, compliments of Incorta. So that winner will be announced tomorrow. So lots of different places to interact up here. So that's the giveaway for this. Excellent. So just to move on to our actual presentation, I'm pleased to welcome Ethan Post, Head of Presales Center of Excellence at Incorta. Ethan works with partners and customers to solve some of the most difficult data challenges on the planet. Before Incorta, he worked with legacy data platforms and technologies for many years as a BI implementation consultant. So Ethan's going to give us an inside look at Incorta's unified data analytics platform, complete with a live demonstration. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ethan.
Fantastic. Really appreciate the introduction, and really excited to be here to talk through Incorta, but also be part of the broader event, which I think is bringing a lot of eyes to the business analytics community. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of go ahead and introduce myself here really quickly and then dive into the meat of the presentation. So as was just mentioned, right, that this session is really focused around how Incorta can enable business users to go from raw data to analytics in this 1 hour time window, right? So the introduction myself was already given, but I think over the next, I'd say 45 to 50 minutes, what I'll expect to do is give, kind of an introduction to Incorta. I know there's been a couple other sessions of Incorta, and in fact, a colleague of mine, Rich Rogers, I think presented directly before this, and hopefully did a pretty good job of tying into what I'll be discussing here. The idea is I'll go through, maybe 20 or so minutes of just introduction to Incorta, talking through what the platform is and how it was designed to really help end users answer the toughest analytical questions on the planet. And then we'll just dive into the product, right? So I'm going to show a couple different product demonstrations of different takes on this concept of how do we go from raw data to analytics, and how does Incorta really enable that for business users. But I think before even diving into the platform itself, I think we probably need to get one thing out of the way up front, which is why can't business users access the data that they need in the current state, right? As was mentioned, I actually spent the entirety of my, my early career prior to Incorta as a BI consultant. So that means implementing this exact what I call BI value chain that sits in front of you here. And reality is, in the legacy approach to getting data in the hands of end users, we're talking about a lot of technologies and a lot of steps in that process, right? So initially, as all kind of data analytics initiatives do, we're starting with data sources. And these could be enterprise applications, databases, any number of sources, right? But step number one in this process is, let's go ahead and run through this ETL process, which is extracting the data, but along the way is transforming, summarizing, and aggregating that data, thus kind of decoupling the data from its original raw transactional state, right? From here, we're oftentimes pushing data to a staging area or some kind of modeling layer, and then finally landing it in something like an enterprise data warehouse or even maybe a departmental data mart. And the reality of this entire process is we're going ahead and we're building that business logic into our data, but along the way, we're also making it simpler for end users to ask questions of data. But the other side of that coin really is the fact that in kind of simplifying that data and giving end users access to data in the way that they can ask questions, what we're actually doing is limiting the amount of answers they can draw from that data, right? So this highly conformed, highly structured data warehouse concept is really the kind of the agreed upon method of giving data to end users and has been for decades, right? Since I'd say the mid to late 90s, folks have been all focused on the enterprise data warehouse. And only at the visualization layer do the end users, right, your business analysts, data consumers of the world, get their hands on data. And this could be through any number of tools, but the reality of this kind of step-by-step process is that it requires you to stand up your BI and analytics stack from a variety of different tools, right? So you'll have a dedicated ETL tool, a dedicated data modeling, data warehouse, potentially a data mart or even a multidimensional warehouse, and then obviously a dedicated visualization tool. So obviously on the people side, this is going to require you, your IT team, your BI team to have specific skill sets within your team and build out a team of experts in these one key areas. But obviously from a total cost of ownership or a licensing standpoint, you're licensing multiple tools to basically solve this end-to-end need, right? So Incorta, what Incorta says is, okay, well, given the legacy challenges of that traditional BI value chain, now end users leveraging the Incorta platform can do that. They can get their hands on data and they can do it in real time, right? So what Incorta says is, let's cut out all those intermediary steps of that traditional BI value chain and connect the Incorta direct data platform to the raw data sources directly and feed data to end users in that raw transactional granularity that they so desire, right? The beauty of Incorta is, as what we call this direct data platform, not only are we ingesting data from multiple different sources, integrating within the direct data platform and serving it up to end users, but as you'll see here coming up shortly, Incorta actually comes prepackaged with its own visualization layer, right? So Incorta really does solve that end-to-end need of business users in getting their hands on data and asking the most complex questions that their business data may have to offer. So let's kind of just compare those two processes from the standpoint of speed, right? So when we talk about speed at Incorta, there's basically three different layers. So we talk about speed to implementation, which this slide depicts pretty well. We also talk about front-end performance, meaning when an end user clicks on a report, are they going to get coffee and coming back and hoping that this thing is finished? Or leveraging Incorta, can they access their data at speed of thought? And then finally, speed to change. So that's another concept that's kind of baked into this process is if you look at that legacy BI value chain, changes is a common consideration, right? At the end of the day, the changing end user requirements are really what drives kind of the constant development and delivery of that traditional BI value chain. But if we just kind of compare apples to apples here, right? If we look at that old way or that legacy approach, what we're doing is we're looking at probably a 12 to 24 month initial rollout before end users see one piece of data or before they're getting any value from that investment, right? And a lot of this time is spent in building that ETL layer, extracting the staging, right? Doing all the development of the data warehouse and presupposing all the questions that can be asked. But as we are going to see here in a second, the Incorta Direct Data Platform really, really reduces the time to implementation and saying, hey, let's take something that's typically taking 12 to 24 months, reduce that timeline to about 1 to 2 months before end users are seeing value on super complex use cases. Right? So cutting down that total time to delivery is what really drives the business user satisfaction. But then the other side of this is, how does Incorta actually enable those end users to make sense of those raw transactional questions that they may have with their data? So there's a couple different things, but in reality, the core IP of Incorta, and anytime you talk to an Incorta employee or one of our partners like PM Square, what you'll hear is direct data mapping, right? So in this depiction, we're showing Incorta pulling in data from cloud sources, on-prem databases, even big data streaming and other sources, and leveraging that direct data map. What we're doing is, when I talk to technical folks, sometimes I'll call it this direct data map almost like a supercharged index. But really what we're doing is pre-calculating all the joins and all those complex relationships amongst your complex enterprise data. And we're compressing that data, pushing it to memory, and then serving it up basically in the tool of choice, right? So as I mentioned, Incorta has its own kind of pre-built analytical application in which we have a visualization layer, or a lot of our customers are leveraging third-party BI tools, because the reality of end users in the visualization space today is you're going to have pretty fervent, believers of Tableau, Power BI, and others. And certainly we don't want to just add another tool set and another skill set for those end users to pick up. Really, the whole of Incorta is how do we ease the kind of the transition of data into the hands of end users? Because at the end of the day, the business is the part of the organization that has those questions and has that burning desire for data. And frankly, a lot of the times, IT can be seen as a bottleneck in getting that data in the hands of end users, right? So let's talk a little bit more about direct data mapping and what it really is. So the reality of direct data mapping is that we've kind of pioneered this new innovation in the BI and analytics space. And if you think about traditionally speaking in that legacy enterprise data warehouse or any other approach to data, the real problem that the enterprise data warehouse was set to solve is the join problem, right? So it's saying if I have a complex ERP that has tens of thousands of tables and any number of complex joins amongst those tables, not only does an end user not have to concern themselves with that jumble of tables and logic behind the scenes, but the reality is, when you go from a 1 to 2 table join to ask a simple question to a 10 to 20 table join, the reality of query performance is not linear, right? So as you see in this depiction here, it really is more of kind of an exponential growth where the more joins, the more complexity you're adding to those source system queries, it takes exponentially longer. What Incorta's done is we've not only kind of pioneered this concept of direct data mapping, but in layman's terms, we've solved that join problem, right? Because now I don't care if it's a 1 to 2 table join in Incorta or a 10 to 20 table join across billions of records. It's going to be more of a linear function of performance as opposed to that exponential, which is really what that enterprise data warehouse was set out to solve. So this concept of an enriched metadata map, is basically the core of what direct data mapping is. So it's taking in all that transactional master data and then building this metadata map layer over all of your transactional data points. And really the result of this is what we call smart query routing. So at the end of the day, if you drag and drop or create a dashboard or an insight inside of Incorta, pulling any number of fields from any number of tables, Incorta has this concept of directly routing that query through not only the most optimal way that query can be executed, but also the method through which end users don't really have to concern themselves, right? So it's smart query routing, but it's almost kind of hidden behind the scenes from end users in what we call a business schema, which we'll take a look at here in a minute. So what are the real tangible benefits that you see in this concept of a direct data platform and really direct data mapping? So because Incorta can pull in data in all this transactional granularity and not have to do the ETL process of summarizing and aggregating data, what that means is you can start at a high level set of, say, summary KPIs or metrics and always drill down to that transaction or even the transaction line level because you have access to the raw data at your fingertips, right? Compare this to that legacy approach where you basically only have subsets of data that have already been predefined by your centralized, say, IT or BI organization. And it's no fault of theirs, right? It's a fault of the technology that's been around for decades. When it comes to rendering reports, Incorta, because of direct data mapping, says, I don't care if it's a 10 to 20 table join, we're going to return it back in a second or two. Whereas, in that legacy approach, again, I call these almost cup of coffee reports where, hey, say you want to pull down sales for the last year, probably going to want to go get lunch and give it a couple hours until your, 200,000 to 1 million records come back. I'll show you an example here coming up where I'm going to show Incorta publishing, nearly 500 million records in a single insight in sub-second. Adding new data is a big one, right? So when we talk about that speed to change, how long is it before I can kind of go from, a question to an answer with a data set that hasn't even been ingested? So I'll actually give you an example of pulling in a real world ERP system in the course of this 1 hour session. And we're talking minutes to new insights, right? And there's another concept here, which I'll talk through called a blueprint, which really accelerates that speed to value. And again, just compared to that legacy approach, we're not talking minutes, right? We're likely talking weeks or months to build the connections, build the model, do some testing validation, and at the end of the day, crosswalking the data, making sure that what's shown in the source system ties out to your summary data mart or your enterprise data warehouse. And with Incorta, it's no longer a problem. And then when we talk about getting accurate results, it's kind of the same, right? So instant access to accurate results because we're just pulling in the transaction line data itself. And on the enterprise or the legacy side, I love this. It says, who knows, right? because at the end of the day, transforming that data and going through those multiple machinations of aggregating or simplifying the data model has ramifications on the data validation side. And frankly, I've as a consultant myself, I've been through 1 to 2 year engagements where 5 to 6 months of that is spent saying, okay, now we have the data warehouse stood up. Now's the time to build out some reports and compare back to the source system so we can prove that whatever we're actually showing on the front end ties back and actually is accurate data, right? So how does Incorta actually do it, right? I've talked at kind of a high level of here's one approach versus the other. I've talked through the concept of direct data mapping, which is really the innovation on the performance side. But when we talk from a process perspective, how does Incorta do what it does? And how do we allow ourselves to basically pull in data from any source under the sun, integrate it together in the single unified platform, and serve data up to end users? And as an aside, I'm hoping folks on the other end of this call are thinking, might sound too good to be true. I'm obviously an Incorta employee, so I'm maybe kind of embellishing a little bit. But as you'll see here towards the tail end when we get into the product itself, the proof is kind of in the pudding when it comes to our ability to connect out to sources, get answers to questions at the speed of thought. And it all starts with this concept of a connector. So we have our own built-in library of connectors for, what are the most commonly used sources on the planet. So things like common ERP, CRMs, maybe logistics or enterprise data warehouse database, and basically all the commonly used type sources in the space. But then we have a partnership with an organization called C Data that expands that well beyond 200 connectors, right? So I think we're now up to nearly 300 connectors when it comes to our ability to just pull data from source systems, be that from a JDBC, a REST API, or any other type of connection. And if you look at this process, right, so we're starting at that data connector, but the Incorta process says, again, I don't care if it's an enterprise application or some database technology or even big data, streaming data lake or others. Incorta is going to ingest everything and almost homogenize that data set, right? Homogenization almost can be viewed as a bad word, but for me, the fact that we now have a single platform which sees every data point as the same, whether it was ingested via API or whether it was some kind of database call. And that acquisition is one of the key drivers of the Incorta value proposition. And frankly, Microsoft itself has actually tabbed Incorta as their premier partner to connect out to Oracle data sources and ingest data to Azure Synapse. So while direct data mapping and the speed and the performance on the front end are really the core innovation, a byproduct of that is our ability to quickly acquire data and partner with organizations like Microsoft for adding value to their current BI stack, right? But past that, we do have integration with Apache Spark to say, hey, obviously we understand that cutting out that ETL process full stop is likely not on anyone's radar, right? Because in that years and years of ETL code and process, what's baked in there is actually this concept of the business logic that's driving your core analytics, right? So at Incorta, we almost kind of differentiate between ETL. So I'll call it bad ETL versus good ETL. On the bad side, this is kind of the transformation for transformation's sake, which is decoupling the data, aggregating it up just to solve that joint problem. Whereas good ETL, on the other hand, is what really drives that performance and also drives the business logic in your systems, right? So Incorta is well equipped to do more of kind of an ELT process where we can extract all the data, load it to Incorta, and then if there's any additional transformations along the way, certainly we can handle that, right? What we're doing is we're cutting out all that bad ETL, which is optimizing the process and optimizing the query performance on the front end. And as I've mentioned, we have this concept of built-in data analytics. So all the dashboarding and visualization is built into Incorta, as we'll see here in a second. So again, I'm going to get back to the end users here because at the end of the day, I don't have Incorta discussions in a bucket, right? It's really cool to show the technology to technical folks who understand those challenges. But at the end of the day, we're solving business challenges for business users. So when I look at someone like a data consumer, this might be the kind of person who maybe they only want to view, say, canned reporting, or maybe they want, data sets served up to them in a way that they can just come in and drag and drop a few things and answer their own questions. But these are folks who I would call, maybe 100 or 200 level users, right? If I'm going back to kind of an academic perspective. But then on the analyst side, right, these might be 300, 400 level users where they want to bring in their own data sets, join it or mash it up with their existing enterprise data that sits in Incorta. And they want to answer really hairy or tough business questions that, the types of organizations that we work with the day in and day out have had problems for years trying to decode, right? But then we don't want to forget about the data scientist community, right? This is obviously a quick growing community, and we'd be remiss if we, we're short-sighted enough to forget about the value of a well-run data science practice within a given organization in 2021. So data scientists love Incorta because at the end of the day, a data scientist in kind of the current current state of affairs is going to spend more time wrangling data and scrubbing data than they're actually going to spend building models. With Incorta, they're pulling in all that data, they're integrating it together at that raw transactional level, and they can now get kind of a combined flattened data view in no time, and then leverage this integrated Apache Spark layer to go ahead and build things like, machine learning models, advanced analytics, or anything else they might do to run the business. So I'll kind of, end the Incorta introduction component on this note. So we've talked through everything from comparing that legacy approach to Incorta. I've talked through how those are different, both from a delivery perspective, as well as just kind of some high level comparisons of, time to insight, speed to change, and other things. And I've talked through the Incorta approach, right? Going all the way from connectors to that front end visualization suite, all within a single platform. The thing I haven't touched upon, which actually is, probably one of the golden nuggets that's contained within the entire Incorta offering, is this concept of a blueprint. So the great thing about Incorta, one of the great things about Incorta as a product is the genesis of the product actually came from a set of ideas that our founders had as they were working at Oracle, right? So as I mentioned, we have a great partnership with Microsoft, but the origins of Incorta really started at Oracle, where a lot of our founders said, hey, we're working day in and day out on building out these Oracle applications and Oracle data sources. But I think it was no secret at the time that there was no good answer for how to extract data from those complex systems in a way that can be streamlined. So what that means is we have great levels of expertise in not only Oracle products, we've also built out expertise on things like Salesforce, NetSuite, which is an Oracle product, even SAP and others. So at the end of the day, we have this concept of a blueprint, right? Which I'll call more of an accelerated offering. And oftentimes you'll think of like an analytical application as the end result, right? I think of an Incorta blueprint more as an acceleration to value to get you to that end result quicker, right? So what this means is we've pre-mapped all the complexity that's contained within a lot of these complex systems. So take Oracle EBS or SAP. We've gone ahead and brought in the base transactional tables, join them together as they would exist in any implementation of these systems under the sun. Then we've created a middle semantic layer we call a business schema, which basically gives the end user the ability to come in and ask their own questions of the data without having to be able to decode the German translations of the SAP tables that sit inside of Incorta. And then at the end of the day, what we've really done, which is the key driver of that business or that data consumer, is we built a set of canned content, right? So you see a couple examples here, like this cash to cash cycle analysis or this kind of bubble chart, which I think is showing like AR aging potentially. Now this is canned content that we built, and say you connect out to your source system, load your data into the Incorta blueprint. Now all of the pre-built or canned content that we've created is going to be available to you. And this usually covers the gamut of, finance, supply chain, operations, HR, and other key business functions. And really with Incorta, the beauty of this analytical application, which we certainly didn't invent, but I think we perfected, is because we bring that raw data in exactly as it exists in the system, you're no longer still having to struggle through and fight with, heaps and heaps of ETL code in order to get these analytical applications off the ground. And I'll show you in a minute here. I'm actually going to be ingesting our NetSuite blueprint into an Incorta instance, loading it right before your eyes and showing you this pre-built content over the next, say, 20 to 30 minutes. So with that said, it's kind of demo time, right? We're about 20 to 25 minutes into this session, and I think now's a good point, now that we all are kind of starting with the same level of experience or understanding of the Incorta platform and how it compares to that legacy approach. Let's dive into the platform and actually kind of uncover some of this value in real time. So don't lose sight of the fact that the name of this session is Raw Data to Analytics in 1 hour with Incorta. And truth be told, may have shot myself in the foot and given myself only really 30 minutes to run this demo. But at the end of the day, I'm thinking through, how do we kind of cater to two separate types of end users? Because if you think of raw data to analytics, to me, that can mean a lot of things, right? So for a data consumer, raw data to analytics might mean, how can I ask my own questions of the data that's already been brought into Incorta and curated for me? Meaning we have a set of raw data or a curated data set on top of raw data that's sitting out there for me to use. How easy is it for me as an end user, as a data consumer with little to no BI background, to come in and build a simple dashboard on top of a complex system? But on the other hand, right, I have that data analyst user group who, those might be like the 300, 400 level users who might think of raw data in a different way. saying, am I able to ingest and analyze my own data at the speed of thought, right? So not being served up curated data sets from something like a centralized BI organization, but how easy is it for me as a user to come in and bring in my own data and answer those questions? So on the data consumer side, I'm going to call this our AR analysis demo. And the idea is, if I'm an end user, is there self-service capabilities on top of billions of records of complex ERP data that seems is actually specific to accounts receivable in this case? And then for your data analyst, I'm going to call this one kind of NetSuite Plus. So the idea here is, hey, if I have a system or an instance of Incorta that has, basically is kind of bare bones, nothing there, can I implement our NetSuite blueprint, get that stood up and loaded, and then kind of access that pre-built content, but then also go ahead and ask my own questions of the data and maybe even integrate with an additional system along the way. So with that said, let's kind of dive into these two separate demo flows, and I'll go ahead and be conscious enough of time that we can tackle both of these, right? So on the AR analysis demo, what I'm going to do is I'm going to log into this Incorta demo instance, right? A tenant name, username, and password. And the first thing I'll show you here is our homepage on the Incorta cloud. So keep in mind, this entire demo is being run from our cloud offering, which I know Rich Rogers definitely just talked through in great detail. But this demo actually kind of starts on the schema tab. And what you can see here is that we have what I'm calling accounts receivable. So this is AR data pulled in from my ERP. We also have a conform date dimension sitting out here, as well as Salesforce data. But notice that that's pretty much all that's been brought into this instance at this point, right? So if I click on accounts receivable, what this actually is, for those of you who might be initiated in the Oracle space, is AR data coming directly from Oracle EBS. So EBS is kind of the legacy Oracle ERP system. And I can look at something like my transaction lines all or GL dist-all table. And if you know that system, you know very well that these are the source transactional tables that we brought in, right? So from that system, we've actually pulled in 14 tables, 18 joins, and about 2 billion records worth of data, right? So it's more like 1.78 billion. And on this transaction lines table itself, it's about 500 million records of transaction line data that I'm going to go ahead and kind of demystify right here, right? And just to kind of add a little bit of complexity on top of that volume, what I have when I look at that source system is kind of a hodgepodge of transactional tables and joins or complexity between them, right? So this is a very, very small subsection of our offering for Oracle EBS, but it'll definitely get the job done, right? Because I have things like my transaction lines table, which joins to my transaction header, which joins to my account table, and so on and so forth. But on the other side, my transaction lines joins directly to, say, my GL dist table and my code combination. So very much a financial AR-based type system. But if I want to take that complexity and that volume, compare this to what I have to do with any other system under the sun, all I have to do as an end user is click Explore Data here. And I'm taken to our analyzer, our visualizer. And what I first might want to do, right, this is kind of a finance use case, and finance folks are notoriously big fans of pivot tables. So what I'll do is kind of collapse all the tables on the left-hand side. And these are the 14 tables I just shown, right? So I have my transaction lines all, in which maybe I want to pull over something like my revenue, quantity invoiced, quantity ordered, and any measure that I want to pull from this data set. But past that, maybe I want to search for a couple of fields that I want to kind of slice and dice this data by. So I'll pull in sales channel in my rows, and party type, which is more or less kind of a customer type in this context. And then finally, let's just pull in some month data, right? So I'll pull in month name, and actually for the sake of this demo, I'll go ahead and sort it by the month number in ascending order, right? So what this is going to give me is basically, January to December, I'm looking at these three measures by these two attributes. Now, before I save this, I'll go ahead and give this a title here called pivot table. Before I save it out, note that what I did is I just dragged and dropped fields from that kind of set of 14 transactional tables that I have over there. But in reality, what this results in is a 5-table join that's being executed against probably right around 1 billion records here. And if you pick any data point, right? So if I look at, say, $3.149 million worth of revenue in January for office stores, reality of this data is that it does not exist in my source system, right? So while I'm showing it here, what I'm doing is aggregating this data on the fly, whereas in that legacy approach, you'd be aggregating it or presupposing this question. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and save this to a dashboard, and I'll call this AR analysis, and go ahead and save it out. Okay, so we now have a dashboard here, a single dashboard called AR analysis that has an insight called pivot. And what you just saw is I rendered that pivot table in real time on top of all those transactional records And that's pretty cool, right? My ability to aggregate that data up across a ton of complex data at once. But if we really are digging into the value of Incorta as a platform, what I really love to uncover is this fact that, okay, if I take this transaction lines table and build what I call a listing table inside of Incorta, this is all that underlying transaction detail, right? So 471 million transaction lines worth of data. And maybe I'll just call this one detail. And the last thing I'll do before I save this insight out to a dashboard is I'll go ahead and toggle on my totals, meaning anything that Incorta identifies as a measure is now being summed up nicely down here, right? So quantity ordered, quantity invoiced, and so on. Okay, so at this point, I've gone from raw data, right? I've gone from that base transactional kind of data model to a dashboard called AR analysis that in a second or two here is going to have a pivot table and that transaction line detail that now identifies 471 million transaction lines. So the last thing I might do just is, my ability to kind of a feather in the cap of Incorta and just building, more of a contextualized high-level visualization is create a quick map. So I'll go ahead and search for country here for my HC parties table. And I'll actually compare this by revenue amount coming from that transaction lines table. So now I have kind of a nice insight that now shows me revenue by country, right? And just for the sake of it, I'll build one more level of detail, which actually is going to go to the state level. And I'll show you why that's such a big deal here in a second, because as an end user, now I'm kind of building out this interactivity, this dashboard. So I can start at the country level, drill in and see sales by state. And now I'll save this map out to our AR analysis. So I've added one additional insight to our dashboard, which is now, more or less complete, right? So I have not only access to all my transaction line detail, but I have two summary insights that are going to give me that nice kind of visualized map component right next to a pivot table that kind of slices and dices this by a set of attributes that I've defined. So with that said, right, we've gone from raw data to insights, and I think we've kind of proven that out. What I'd love to kind of hammer home is the fact that at the end of the day, what I can start to do is look at, okay, well, within the US, if I start to, filter contextually on this dashboard, I can filter on the US. And in a second here, this is going to show me sales by states in the US, right? So obviously California, being high population, going to contribute pretty heavily to revenue. So maybe I want to look at the highest contributor of revenue by state. And as I continue to drill in, what I'm doing is I'm actually reducing the total data set in all these visualizations, right? So you can see all these other two visualizations change as well. And the last thing I might key in on is if I just kind of want to scroll over to a random data point, say this $1,076,000 worth of revenue. Now I'm looking at sales channel financial services, party type organization in the month of May. And keep in mind, we're looking at, $1,076,000. What I see down below, which is probably the most important thing here, especially for finance users, is I've gone from 500 million records to 38 records that make up this point of view. And what's probably more important is if I add up or sum all the revenue coming from these 38 transaction lines, it's exactly $1,076,567.08, which ties out to my pivot table, which ties out to that high-level map, and really ties back to the value that I've been talking about for the past 45 minutes, which is as an end user, there's no concern of whether or not the data that I see in the dashboard is going to tie my source system, because I'm pulling that data in directly at Incorta and basically operationalizing that for your common business user. Okay, so let's transition to more of, I'd say, a more complex type demo, right? Where we've gone from raw data in the context of no set of visualizations and just like a basic transactional data model. Now on the data analyst side, what I'd love to show is, can I bring in my own data and show analytics on top of a complex system here in a matter of, we have maybe about 17 or so minutes left. So what I'll go ahead and do is navigate back to my Incorta instance. And this time, rather than actually kind of starting in this Incorta instance itself, what I'd love to do is take a step back and talk through the Incorta cloud offering. So while I'm sure that Rich kind of uncovered a lot of great value on the Incorta cloud, if anyone was able to join that session, one of the great things that we can do that he may not have touched upon was this concept of deploying our pre-built blueprint content directly from this kind of centralized spot, right? So what I can do is I can look at this Incorta demo cluster, which I own in our Incorta cloud admin portal. And what I can do is click on import and install this NetSuite blueprint in real time, right? So I'm going to go ahead and tenant name, username, and password, same as I had before. And actually, I'm going to keep import sample data off because I'd love to show you how easy it is to not only kind of import the model itself, but in real time go out and actually load that data right before our eyes. So keep in mind, right, if I go back to this instance, hopefully before any of these schemas have been included, right, we have no NetSuite data here. At the end of the day, what we're looking at is accounts receivable data. We have this date dimension in Salesforce, which, by the way, I've actually already brought that Salesforce blueprint in. So sales, finance, marketing, and we're constantly building this out as well. But if I go back to my schema tab, what you're seeing is in real time now I've added my NetSuite accounting, NetSuite entity, and you'll see here we're kind of building out now, adding those additional blueprint schemas. So what I can do is in real time is, hey, maybe I want to go into this accounting schema. I'll load this one up in real time. And I'm actually going to go schema by schema just to give you the impression that there's no trickery behind the scenes. Certainly we are doing all this in real time as we're kind of running the demo, right? So I'll go ahead and load our entity schema, which is going to be customers, vendors, employees, sales reps. Inventory, which is giving us item location level inventory levels for our NetSuite data. We also have our item table, right, which is kind of the item master within NetSuite. And again, if anyone here is familiar with NetSuite, the same thing I just showed on the EBS side definitely holds true, where what we're actually showing is the kind of the core transactional models behind this, right? So this is actually the security model. And I think I saw earlier on in the chat, there were questions around, do we handle row level security? So just to kind of put that to rest, we actually are here inheriting the roles and permissions from this ERP, which is NetSuite. And what we can do is through a series of creating session variables and initializing those session variables when a user logs in, we can actually impart the same security that you have inside of your base ERP system inside of Incorta directly. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually loading our transaction tables, right? So this would be transactions, transaction lines, and anything else that NetSuite is storing around transactions. And then finally, I'll go ahead and load our some of these static and system tables. So as I'm waiting for this to load, right, it'll probably take about a minute or so. We've now gone through, I think, 8 or 9 different schemas in which we're still loading a couple of them. But what you'll see is we've already loaded this right in front of our eyes, right? So accounting, entity, all of this data has been loaded in real time from these schemas that have been imported from our blueprint. But if we talk about the blueprint as a whole, it's not just the schemas, right? So if I go into our transaction schema, it's not just this complexity that we've brought in of saying, okay, well, we have a transactions table, which joins out to transaction lines, to our customers, vendors, entities, right? That kind of complex relationships inside that complex business application. What's more important probably is this concept of a business schema. So keep in mind, I'm doing all this through the lens of a data analyst. And at the end of the day, my ability to not only bring in all of those schemas, but also this kind of middle semantic layer that says, well, hey, we've already kind of mapped all of the raw transactional tables, but then we've mapped them to like this middle curated layer where I have a set of core criteria coming from, frankly, all over the place inside that blueprint that gives me the ability to filter on things like, transaction status, account status, or account type. And then I have transaction level data, which is things like transaction number, transaction line ID, and others. I have a date table, I have an entity table with things like customers, vendors, and others. But at the end of the day, this is my ability as an end user to now kind of curate that data set. So if I want to say ship this off to my head of finance for him to build his own reports, he doesn't have to know the hundreds of thousands of tables that I may have brought in from a source system. He can go ahead and kind of, again, answer his own questions, which is what Incorta is really getting at. And as we've seen now, we've gone ahead and loaded this transactions table. So the next thing I can show you is on this NetSuite blueprint front, right? We have a set of dashboards that have also been imported. So if you were paying close attention, you would have seen that this NetSuite blueprint folder is also net new from what I loaded from our kind of cloud admin, right? So that includes things like executive dashboards, finance, sales order, operations, HR, and even some audit and admin. And if I just kind of go in and look at the first dashboard here, what we've done in a matter of minutes is gone from absolutely nothing related to NetSuite to importing our NetSuite blueprint, loading that data up in real time, and now getting operational analytics for someone at maybe the C level or the head of finance or head of sales. That'll give me access to things like, okay, well, what's revenue by year day? I can now drill into 2019, which looks like our highest, revenue year, and look at that. I also have a map similar to the one I already built out where I can look at by state revenue that's coming in, right? So maybe I want to go ahead and again filter on the highest state by revenue. And keep in mind, all this is being fed from those schemas that we just loaded in real time. And as I work my way down, right, I'm getting to things like, okay, well, what are the core customer types in this period of higher revenue in the state of highest contribution revenue. Who's my number one sales rep, which looks like an individual named Mary Redding, right? So as I'm continuing to filter and drill down, what I'm really getting to is this concept of transactional details down below, similar to what I've already built out. But now, again, I'm looking at 136 records that make up this point of view. And at the end of the day, this pre-built content is all kind of out there for me to come in and consume. But if you were to do this in, say, a traditional data warehouse or something like a NetSuite, which has its own kind of limited reporting capabilities, we're looking at an 8-table join across 5 different schemas as I run this report. But for an end user, especially someone who's more of a data consumer, right? They wouldn't really concern themselves with this. It's more coming in here and basically analyzing the data as it exists. But I'll kind of throw another wrench in this, right? So in this case, we're looking at accounts receivable data from EBS, which is obviously a complex ERP. Say we have another business unit which actually runs NetSuite, and maybe they run Salesforce as well. And maybe on the sales side, what we see a lot of our customers is things like you have a complex sales process. So things like issuing a quote and an opportunity and winning a deal all happens within my CRM, which is Salesforce, right? On the other side of that, I might have everything that happens in NetSuite from the second that opportunity closes in Salesforce, creates a sales order. Then we go through and actually ship the order, issue the invoice, and actually receive the payment. So if you think of a complex business process like that happens across 2 separate systems, there's no way on the planet that anyone can answer that complex question with any tool that's really not Incorta, right? And what I'll show you here in a second is, if I go into the Salesforce schema, just to kind of bring this up to that 400 level course that I'd referred to earlier, I now have Salesforce data in here. And if I want to join this across, right, I can look at something like, okay, well, maybe I want to join my Salesforce data to my NetSuite data directly. So I can look at something like an opportunity that can join to a transaction. And in this case, I know the business, right? Maybe there's an integration that's already been built out where something like a sales order number inside NetSuite has been integrated into Salesforce. And from here, maybe I just want to join that on our transaction ID and click done. So not only have I brought in that blueprint, I've also integrated that with an existing source system that we've already brought into Incorta. And what you can see if I look at this diagram is, okay, well, now I've gone from opportunity to transactions. And the net of this is now I can actually answer a pretty complex business question, where if I go back into my visualizer, I can do something like look at my transaction table, right? And maybe what I'm interested in looking at in transactions, if I scroll down, is something like, let me go ahead and collapse these. If I expand out transactions, I can come down here to some transaction details. So maybe something like a transaction number and transaction date. Maybe I want to sort this by transaction date, right? So I'll see most recent transactions are actually taking place up top. Then I'll actually filter this really quickly by I'll actually filter this by just sales orders, right? So keep in mind this business process says when an opportunity in Salesforce is closed, it issues a sales order inside of NetSuite, right? So now I have a set of 13,000 or so NetSuite sales orders. And what I can actually take this and do from this is now start to build in some of that NetSuite data, or excuse me, Salesforce data. So if I look at something like an opportunity, right? If I find my opportunity table here, maybe I want to pull in something like my opportunity stage, right? So obviously you'd expect that all these are close won opportunities, given the fact that we've closed the deal and issued that sales order. But maybe I also want to pull in my amount from my Salesforce opportunity. But then if you kind of recall back to the situation that I'd set up, is it really all starts with a quote, because even in Salesforce, we're issuing things like customer quotes, where maybe I have a description of a quote, and I even have a subtotal that I can pull in, which I'll go ahead and just search for. So at the quote level, I can have a subtotal, but I also have a subtotal at my quote line level, right? So I can even go from my NetSuite sales order transaction to the quote line that we can tie out basically to the penny. And then maybe I'll also add something like a description of the quote line, just to kind of show that we're looking all the way from my originating transaction inside NetSuite, looking back to the Salesforce data, right? So as you see, we're looking at opportunity data, we're looking at quote data, quote line data. And if I look at that query plan, pretty interesting, right? Because now I've gone across systems and I'm looking at a complex business process that actually takes place across multiple systems. In addition to that, maybe I want to look at this table called product, which I'm capturing in Salesforce, that actually captures at the quote line level which products were actually included in that quote. that were eventually passed on to the eventual customer, right? And then I can go the other way too. So maybe I want to go back to my NetSuite data and I want to look at my NS entity schema, which is going to give me everything from customers, sales reps, vendors. So maybe I want to pull in my customer table. Maybe I want to pull in my sales rep table. And I can go ahead and really quickly, I'll just search for this field called name. This is going to give me the full name of a customer. Oops, let me go ahead and close this window here. So now we have a customer. I can also pull in the sales rep who actually initially sold that deal. And what I have is actually a pretty interesting flattened analysis that I've gone from absolutely nothing on the NetSuite side. In 10 or so minutes, I now have the ability to basically monitor a super complex cross-system process. So I'm going from the originating kind of sales rep to the customer name, to the NetSuite sales order and the transaction date on which that deal actually closed, right? Then I'm going to the Salesforce opportunity amount, all the way through to the product that was issued on that quote line. And if I look at this complex query plan, that's what that business process looks like, right? Originating at the product and ending at the customer and the sales rep who actually were part of that deal. So to me, that's the real value of Incorta when we look at that kind of 300, 400 level concept is, of course, we can go from raw data in the context of data that's already been ingested into Incorta. But when I talk about speed in Incorta, I'm not just talking about the front end, right? I'm not talking about the billions of records. I'm not talking about just our ability to quickly implement the platform. I'm also talking about speed to change. So when you have a data analyst who's interested in pulling in a net new system, how quickly can that be done? And I think hopefully we've proven out that it's not only possible, it's extremely simplified and streamlined for a user who understands and can use Incorta as a platform with a little bit of training. So here's kind of where I'll leave you with a bit of, I'll say a call to action. Given everything we've seen today in, say, the past 20 or so minutes has happened on that Incorta cloud instance, right? Everything from that 2 billion record schema of complex ERP data to bringing in that NetSuite blueprint and loading it in real time, and then joining it with our Salesforce data to give us access to information of that complex business process. What I'd encourage everyone that's actually with us here today to do is go to cloud.incorta.com/sign up. You can actually sign up for your own Incorta cloud trial today. And the cool thing is that same option of deploying that NetSuite blueprint, and soon that will expand to Oracle EBS, Salesforce, SAP, and others. You can deploy that yourself and actually use our internal sample data sets to experience that for yourself real time. But where Incorta really starts to become powerful for an end user is if you're an SAP customer, an Oracle customer, taking that blueprint concept and updating the data source to actually load your data in real time and getting answers to those business questions that you've never thought you could uncover. To me, that's not only the real value, but that's kind of, the low-hanging fruit, right? Starting with that Incorta cloud trial, you can certainly go out and do that even starting today. So with that said, that kind of concludes my presentation here. I know we're just getting about time, and I think I've seen a lot of questions and comments that have come up. So I'll go ahead and open it back up to the PM Square team, and hopefully we can start to tackle some of those questions.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Ethan. That was great. So we do have some questions. So I'm going to start with, are there volume constraints? For example, a maximum number of rows or storage file size?
I think I'll kind of answer that question in two ways. So on the Incorta cloud side, that's a great, obviously a great benefit of the cloud solution is that it's super scalable. So if you expect to pull in an additional, terabyte worth of data or billions of records, certainly you can always up the machine size and kind of right size things to include that set of data volume. In terms of volume constraints, I think there's some kind of theoretical limit in the tens of billions of records of unique records in a single table. I'd have to kind of get back to you on that. I don't want to misquote, but frankly, for some of the largest customers in the world, we've not really ran into that level of constraints. I mean, I'll tell you honestly, and I'm fully transparent when these types of questions come up, Incorta is not suited for petabytes of data, right? We do have organizations that have petabytes of data sitting out in something like an S3 that we're pulling into, but I consider Incorta more of like a warm to hot type data warehouse for analytics, as opposed to storing that data for historical purposes. So that's almost how I delineate things.
Great, awesome, that makes sense, perfect. Do we have the next one? Perfect. So here's another technical one. Can Incorta perform fuzzy joins where the keys don't match up perfectly? So for example, case differences or extra text in the keys on one side, for example.
Absolutely. I'd say it's probably more of an edge case, right? So Incorta as a platform is meant for operational analytics. And as you saw, right, I set up a join between Salesforce and NetSuite. That's for the sake of a demo, likely pretty simple. But I'll give you kind of some anecdotal evidence where I recently actually finished a POC where we're pulling together SAP data with the legacy ERP. And the organization I was working with hadn't quite done the type of master data consolidation that you'd need to do that, right? So customer in system A doesn't really match the customer system B. And what I did is actually using that Apache Spark layer, built a fuzzy matching set of logic that did all that master data translation. And certainly it's not perfect, right? But it's enough to kind of, get things up and running and to fine tune over time. But a great use case, I think, for doing things exactly like that.
Excellent. Awesome. Fantastic. Where's our next question, please? All right. Are there published business cases for organizations who have implemented Incorta that could help other organizations evaluate return on investment? So I guess looking for kind of the sales pitch for, selling it within your organization.
Yeah, again, a great question. And certainly I appreciate the eye towards value of Incorta. We have a really nice Incorta community, right? So community.incorta.com that actually has some of those kind of centralized customer use cases that folks have been willing to share that I think might better institutionalize the value. The other thing is we actually have a Forrester total cost of ownership report that came out last year that said, on average, right, doing some really deep analysis of Incorta versus competitors and versus kind of the status quo, on average, you're looking at like a 300% increase or 300% ROI based on total cost of ownership and other factors. So certainly that Forrester report is available on our website, but then I would also encourage you to go out to community.incorta.com to view some of those use cases.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. Here's the next one. Okay, so this participant was for some information on the Incorta cloud security. So my IT department is hesitant to allow cloud vendors to attach to our on-prem databases.
Yeah, that's fair, and I think it's a common concern. I mean, I think as likely everyone on this call realizes, like the industry as a whole is moving towards the cloud, and certainly we want to be part of that as well. But it does come with its own set of security concerns, and any InfoSec organization is going to have their own, thorough evaluation. I mean, our cloud offering is fully SOC 2 Type 2 compliant, so that's a pretty good initial kind of starting point for that conversation of here's the minimum set of requirements and able to do that. And from there, we're talking about like row-level security, full encryption, and we do have a couple of different flexible options in terms of connecting to on-prem sources. So, some IT organizations like one over the other, but I think what we try to do is be flexible in our approach, but at the end of the day, have rigid, standardized concepts to data security on our cloud offering.
Awesome. Okay, excellent. Let's see what else we have. All right. If I bring a large volume of data into Incorta, can I share that with other developers to use in their models, or do they need to bring in the data a second time?
No, it's a good question. So this actually, and I don't know if folks typically do this, but I'll just kind of show you for the sake of a demonstration rather than talking hypothetically, is if I go out to, that accounts receivable data that I showed you, right? I have the ability to share this with, any group or anyone else in my organization. I think I happen to be the only user here, right? But I could share it to my, admin group if I had sales, marketing, any kind of, group set up in that application. So certainly it's the concept of being able to democratize data, right? So not having it be, siloed data effect inside of Incorta itself, but good question.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions that we have here? Okay. Oh, so here we go. So Ethan, I'm a huge fan of Incorta. The question I most get when I talk to people about it is, wait, is this for real? Can it really do all of that? So maybe address that point. Yes, it's for real.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, and I kind of steal this phrase from a lot of our sales leadership, but I mean, we're in the prove it business, right? Because we're disruptive technology. First off, when I hear that question, I know I'm talking to the right person, but frankly, I think our approach is like, yeah, let's bring it to a POC. Let's get you in a trial And if you don't believe it, let's kind of show you firsthand with your data. And that's really when the light bulb starts to turn on.
No, absolutely. Excellent. All right. Do we have a few more there, Leslie, or are we? Oh, here we go. So can Incorta deliver data to external repositories?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a couple different methods of connectivity. So I'd say probably the most common is Incorta has what we call a Postgres SQL wrapper around the entire platform, meaning anything that can read Postgres can pull data from Incorta and leverage it in external repositories or downstream systems. We also have an API that's relatively new to the platform that'll allow for all kinds of API type interactions, gets, pulls, and those types of things. And then the other thing is leveraging that internal Spark library. We can write complex Python scripts that do things like distribute data that's stored in Incorta across to other systems or platforms directly. So a lot of options. I'd say the most flexible is that kind of Spark Python based approach, but certainly there's more standard approaches than that.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all of our questions. That was an amazing session. So I'm going to get Leslie to throw the slides back up for us. So again, thank you so much, Ethan. That was amazing.
Yeah.
And if anyone does still have some outstanding Incorta questions for that you still have after this, you can obviously reach out to Ethan on this platform, but you can also join us at our Genius Bar session. So tomorrow there is an Incorta Genius Bar session still available at 12:30 Eastern. So if you still have some questions or you want to discuss some things or see how it might apply to your organization, I'd invite you to join us for that. So let's talk about what's coming up next. So we have 2 sessions coming up in the next time block. So we have a strategy session, Can Data Mesh Fix Your Data Mess? And that's being presented by PM Square. So I think that's Ryan Dolly and Mike DeGuys. And then we have an execution session, Cloud Checker Cost Management. That's being presented by Cloud Checker. So we have those 2 sessions that you can jump onto after this. And then, I'm sorry, the kind of rest of the day, we have our Bacon Hangout. So this is your opportunity to jump in and create your own hangout where you could, find a like-minded group of people, or you can jump into one of the other sessions. And I just popped through them during my last break, and there's a whole bunch of great sessions up there. So do reach out or jump onto those hangouts. I think that's one of the real benefits of this platform that we're using at this conference. So looking ahead to Thursday, we have a couple more. We have 2 more Incorta sessions coming up. So some hands-on enablement sessions where you can get your hands into looking at this Incorta's unified data analytics platform. And let me see what else I have. I guess that's the end of our session. So again, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much to Ethan for presenting. That was a really a great technical set of content that really kind of shows the power of Incorta. So thanks everybody.